82 years old, 41 years as a neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, 763 brain surgeries, and I remember each one, not just the outcomes, the smell of the OR at 6 in the morning, that particular cocktail of iodine and recycled air that I can still conjure if I close my eyes. The sound a bone drill makes against the human skull, that specific pitch somewhere between a dentist's chair and a machine shop. The way the scrub nurses moved around me like I was the center of a solar system, following my gravity without question. There is a bronze plaque in the Lunda Building corridor with my name on it. A small brass rectangle that reads, "In honor of Dr. Richard Mercer, 4 decades of pioneering achievement in neurosurgery." I want you to sit with that image for one full moment. Picture that man. Hold him in your mind clearly. Then I want you to picture me this past Tuesday morning in a 12 by 14 room in a boarding house on Center Street in Brockton, Massachusetts, counting out quarters and dimes on a pressboard nightstand to see if I had enough for a bag of instant oatmeal and still make bus fare to my weekly check-in at the methadone clinic. The same hands that once reconstructed a 16-year-old boy's crushed cerebral cortex after a crash on Route 93. The same hands that were written about in the New England Journal of Medicine 4 separate times. Shaking, counting coins. You think intelligence is armor? You think discipline is a permanent condition and not just a habit waiting for the right pressure to break. I am the living, breathing, 82-year-old answer to both of those questions. And the answer is no. If you stay with me, if you give me the next 15 minutes of your life, I am asking you to leave one word below this video when it ends. Not a thumbs up, a word. I need to know someone heard me. And subscribe, please. Not for the algorithm, not because I have something to sell, but because the only thing I have left that is worth anything is the truth about what I did to myself. And the truth is the only debt I have left that I can actually pay. I was born in Concord, Massachusetts in 1943, the son of a pharmacist and a schoolteacher. My father kept a clean, ordered shop on Main Street, a hand-lettered sign in the window, Mercer's Pharmacy, since 1931. He polished that counter every single morning before opening, and he knew the names of every customer's children and every customer's dog. I grew up in that precision. I grew up understanding that knowledge was the most durable currency a man could carry, and that the discipline to apply it was the thing that separated the exceptional from the merely competent. I graduated summa cum laude from Dartmouth in 1965. I entered Harvard Medical School that same autumn, and by 1968, before I had even completed my residency, I had published 2 papers in the New England Journal of Medicine. I was 25 years old, and I already knew, with the absolute unexamined certainty that only the very young and the very arrogant are capable of, that I was exceptional. Not talented, exceptional. Talent is something you receive. Exceptionalism is a verdict you hand down about yourself. And once you believe it, it becomes the load-bearing wall of every single thing you build afterward. My first attending position was at Mass General. Within 8 years, I was chief of neurosurgery. I bought a 4-story federal townhouse on Beacon Hill, wide plank oak floors, original 8/8 windows overlooking Acorn Street, a kitchen renovation that alone cost more than my father earned in a decade. My wife Carolyn was a concert pianist who performed at Jordan Hall and occasionally at the Kennedy Center. We had 2 children, my daughter Abigail and my son James. We had dinner parties attended by senators, by university presidents, by the kind of people whose names are affixed to the bottoms of donor walls in buildings they have funded. I remember standing in my kitchen one December evening in 1984, watching snow accumulate on the Back Bay rooftops, holding a glass of Chateau Margaux that I had opened because a Tuesday seemed to me like reason enough. And I thought, with absolute and unironic seriousness, that I had arrived at a permanent altitude, that the altitude was mine by right of effort and intelligence, and that it could not be revoked. I was 41 years old. I want you to hold that man in your mind, that man with his wine and his plaque and his certainty, because everything that follows is the story of a man who forgot that altitude is always borrowed, never owned. The first pill was not dramatic. That is the thing that no one who has not been there will believe, and the thing that everyone who has been there knows in their bones. The fall does not begin with a thunderclap. It begins on an ordinary afternoon with an ordinary man making an ordinary decision that feels in the moment like the most reasonable thing in the world. In the summer of 1997, after an 11-hour procedure in which I stood in one position long enough that something in my lower lumbar spine filed its formal complaint, I herniated 2 discs. A colleague, a man I played squash with twice a week at the Racket Club on Boylston, wrote me a prescription for OxyContin, 30 tablets. Standard protocol, absolutely defensible, exactly the right medical decision. I took the first one that afternoon, sitting at my desk in my Beacon Hill office, surrounded by the framed diplomas and the awards and the photographs of myself with people who mattered. And within 45 minutes, I understood something that I should have recognized immediately as the most dangerous feeling I had ever had. I had not felt that way since 1971, since the last time I was so young and so unencumbered and so invincible that the future seemed like a personal gift rather than a shared condition. The pain dissolved, yes, but something else dissolved with it. The weight of 40 years of being Richard Mercer. The accumulated pressure of being the man who held the gravity. I called my colleague the following week and requested a refill. He hesitated. I used the precise, technical language of a physician describing a legitimate pain management protocol, and he wrote the prescription because I was Richard Mercer, and Richard Mercer did not have bad clinical judgment. That is the specific place where the flaw that had always been inside me, that verdict of exceptionalism I had been carrying since I was 25, became the surgical instrument of my own destruction. I told myself I could manage this the way I managed every complication that had ever landed on my table, with superior knowledge, with iron discipline, with the confidence of a man who had never met a problem that his mind could not disassemble. What I failed to account for was that a brain being chemically rewritten does not consult its owner's credentials before continuing the rewrite. By 2001, I was sourcing from 3 separate physicians who did not know about each other. By 2003, I was in an alley off Blue Hill Avenue in Dorchester, in the same camel hair overcoat I wore to the Kennedy Center, handing $400 in cash to a 23-year-old man who kept his phone tucked in his sock. And standing in that alley, in that coat, I told myself, without hesitation, without the faintest recognition of what I had become, that this was a logistical problem, not a moral one. That was the most precise symptom of the disease, not the pills themselves, but the absolute PhD-level sophistication of the denial. The morning the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine called me before a formal hearing was November 14th, 2005, a Tuesday. I remember the fluorescent light in that conference room on Tremont Street, the specific cold pallor of institutional lighting, the kind that removes shadow from everything and makes every face look already guilty. There were 6 people across the table from me, people who had once treated me like a building worth preserving. I had been reported by my OR circulating nurse, Patricia Delgado, who had worked beside me for 9 years and who had, I would later learn, been documenting my behavior for the better part of a year. The tremors during pre-op, the morning I dropped an instrument tray and stood staring at the scattered clamps on the sterile floor for nearly 20 seconds while the entire room held its breath and waited to see who I was that day. They revoked my license before I had finished my water. In the parking lot afterward, I sat in my black Mercedes S-Class, and I did not cry. I told myself this was a recoverable setback, that I would appeal, that I would apply the same intelligence that had built this career to the project of rebuilding it. My wife Caroline had left 8 months earlier, taking with her the careful, practiced silence she had maintained for years about what she knew. Our children, adults by then, had closed ranks around her like a wall. The Beacon Hill townhouse went to foreclosure in 2007, sold at auction for a number that would have seemed like a rounding error to the man I was in 1984. The retirement accounts were largely liquidated, absorbed by legal costs, by the procurement costs of maintaining a habit that now required daily management at a level my father's pharmaceutical training could not have anticipated. I moved into a studio in South Boston and told the few colleagues who still occasionally contacted me that I was doing private consultation work. I was not doing private consultation work. I was watching television and counting pills and managing what I had reclassified in the private language of my own mind as a chronic neurological pain protocol. I maintained that classification until the morning I woke up in the studio and could not find my glasses, and sat for 40 minutes on the floor of my bathroom in the dark because standing up required a negotiation my body was no longer willing to engage in without its terms being met first. I was 68 years old. I had been the chief of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I was sitting on a bathroom floor in South Boston, waiting for my body to give me permission to stand. I am 82 years old this spring. I live in a boarding house in Brockton, Massachusetts, in a room that smells of old carpet and other people's cooking. The other residents are mostly men in their 40s and 50s who are also navigating recovery, also finding their way back from something, from different directions, through different wreckage, toward something that might be called a life. They do not know who I was. I have not told them. There is a pawn shop receipt that I keep in my wallet. I have carried it for 6 years, folded into a square so small it fits behind what used to be my medical license. It is a receipt from the day I sold the last object I owned with any monetary value. A 1958 Rolex Datejust that Caroline gave me on the 10th anniversary of my appointment as chief of neurosurgery. The pawn ticket says Mercer, R, $340. $340 for the watch that was placed on my wrist at the peak of my entire life by the hands of the woman I have not spoken to in 17 years. I carry it because it is the most honest accounting I possess. The peak of everything I built, reduced to its truest monetary value, expressed in the only currency that does not lie. What someone was actually willing to give me for it on a Thursday afternoon in a pawn shop on Commercial Street. My daughter Abigail has not returned a call or a message in 11 years. My son James sends a card at Christmas. Careful, brief, no return address. The handwriting of a man who has learned to love from a safe distance. The plaque in the Lunder building still has my name on it. I know because I walked past it once, about 3 years ago, when a medical appointment brought me back to the hospital for the first time in many years. I stood in that corridor for a long time, reading my own name. And what I felt was not pride. It was not even grief exactly. It was the specific and unspeakable experience of looking at the gravestone of someone you used to be and understanding that the grave was dug not by fate, not by illness that arrived unbidden, not by bad luck or broken systems or the cruelty of other people, but by your own hands, with the same precision, the same absolute certainty of purpose, the same methodical expertise that you brought to every other project in the long architecture of your life. I believed for 4 decades that intelligence was protection, that exceptionalism was a permanent condition, and not just a story you tell yourself until the story stops being true. What I know now, and what it is devastatingly, irretrievably too late to do anything useful with, is that the mind is not a fortress. It is tissue. It is chemistry. It is exactly as fragile and as fallible as each of the 763 brains I held in my gloved hands over 41 years, every single one of which could be broken by the right amount of pressure applied in exactly the right place. I was not exceptional. I was temporary. And the altitude I was so certain I had earned was borrowed all along. Borrowed from time, borrowed from the people around me who maintained the illusion with me, and now returned in full with nothing left to show for the loan but a pawn shop receipt and a Christmas card with no return address. If you were somewhere in the early part of this story, if you were standing at the altitude right now and telling yourself that your intelligence makes the fall impossible, I am asking you, as directly and as plainly as I know how, to hear me. The fall does not begin with a thunderclap. It begins on a Tuesday afternoon in an office full of diplomas with something that makes the weight lift for 45 minutes and a voice in your head that speaks with the full authority of every credential you have ever earned and tells you that you, of all people, are the one who can manage this.